I am Major Clara Ramsey, 35 years old. Yesterday, I stood in the rain and watched an honor guard fold a flag over my husband's casket. Yesterday, I buried Marcus. Today, I became homeless. When I tried to slide my key into the heavy oak door of our Victorian home in Charleston, it didn't turn. It stopped halfway, hitting a metal barrier that hadn't been there when I left for my shift at the base 24 hours ago. I jiggled it, thinking maybe the humidity had swollen the wood again, but deep down, the cold pit in my stomach told me otherwise. The lock had been changed. Through the beveled glass of the bay window, I could see inside. Julian, my husband's half-brother, who hasn't worked a verified day in his 28 years of life, was lying sprawled across Marcus's favorite leather recliner. He was eating my potato chips, his boots resting on the mahogany coffee table, crumbs falling onto the rug I'd bought with my first deployment bonus. But that wasn't what made my breath hitch. In the corner of the room, my stepmother-in-law, Elena, was holding a small gray trash bin. She was pinching my husband's medals, the bronze star and the purple heart, the metal cold and heavy with sacrifice, between her manicured thumb and forefinger, like they were soiled tissues. She dropped them into the bin. Raymond, my father-in-law, stood by the fireplace, sipping a tumbler of scotch at 10 in the morning. He laughed, a low, dry sound. Just clearing out the low-class debris. They think I am just a grieving widow, weak and isolated. They think because I came from nothing in the Rust Belt of Ohio, I have no fight left in me. But they don't know that before Marcus took his last breath, he left me a nuclear weapon buried under a mountain of legal paperwork. If you believe that no one has the right to trample on a soldier's honor, especially in their own home, comment, respect below. I stood on the porch, my hand still gripping the useless key, the metal biting into my palm. I was still in my OCPs, my operational camouflage pattern uniform. Boots laced tight, the fabric heavy with the sweat of a night shift that I had taken because I couldn't bear to sit in an empty house. I hadn't slept in 30 hours. My eyes felt like they were packed with sand, but the sight through that window sharpened my vision instantly. I pounded on the door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the heavy thud of a fist used to commanding attention. The lock clicked from the inside. The door swung open, revealing Julian. He was shirtless, wearing nothing but basketball shorts, his skin pale and soft, contrasting sharply with the hardened, sun-weathered faces of the soldiers I worked with every day. The smell hit me instantly. Stale beer and expensive cologne trying to cover up body odor. He leaned against the doorframe, a smirk playing on his lips as he looked me up and down, sneering at my uniform. "Dad said you have 2 hours," Julian drawled, scratching his chest. 2 hours to get your trash out of my house." "Your house?" My voice came out lower than I intended, a growl vibrating in my chest. "Get out of my way, Julian." I pushed past him. He stumbled back, surprised by the force of my shoulder. For a guy who bragged about his gym membership, he had zero center of gravity. The inside of the house, my sanctuary, the place Marcus and I had spent 5 years restoring, sanding every floorboard by hand, was a war zone. But it wasn't an enemy invasion. It was a domestic purge. 3 movers, burly men who looked uncomfortable in the tension, were hauling out the vintage bookshelf Marcus had loved. "Careful with that," I barked, instinct taking over. "Ignore her," a voice floated from the living room. Elena. She was standing in the center of the room, wearing a silk floral dress that probably cost more than my car. She held a lace handkerchief to her nose, as if the mere presence of my belongings released a foul odor into the air. Beside her, Victoria, her daughter and Marcus's stepsister, was standing on a step stool, ripping our wedding portrait off the wall. The frame cracked as she dropped it carelessly into a cardboard box labeled "Donations." "What do you think you're doing?" I walked into the room, my boots thudding heavily on the heart pine floors. "Reclaiming the space," Elena said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, the kind that rots your teeth. "We need to exercise the unpleasant memories. This house needs to be ready for Julian. He needs a proper bachelor pad, don't you think?" My eyes darted around the room, cataloging the destruction. And then, I saw it. On the kitchen island, sitting on top of a greasy, half-eaten Domino's pizza box, was the flag case. The triangular wood and glass case holding the American flag that had draped Marcus's coffin just yesterday. It was sitting there like a coaster, a ring of grease staining the wood. The blood rushed to my ears, a roaring sound like a transport plane taking off. I crossed the room in 3 strides. I grabbed the flag case, pulling it to my chest, checking the glass for cracks. "You put this on a pizza box?" I hissed, turning to face them. "This is a burial flag. Do you have any idea what this means?" Raymond stepped forward from the fireplace. He was immaculate in his charcoal suit, looking every bit the real estate tycoon who owned half of downtown Charleston. He looked at me with the same expression one might look at a cockroach scurrying across a Michelin star dinner plate. "It means my son is dead," Raymond said coldly. "And it means the connection between this family and whatever you are is severed." "I am his wife," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I was struggling to contain. "I am a Coleman." "You were a temporary glitch," Raymond corrected, swirling the ice in his glass. "A lapse in judgment Marcus made during a rebellious phase. He's gone now. Order is being restored. This house has been in the Coleman family for 4 generations. It belongs to the bloodline, not to some stray from Ohio who thinks putting on a uniform makes her respectable. I paid the mortgage on this house for the last 3 years while Marcus was sick," I shot back. "My name is on the deed." "We'll see about that," Raymond smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth. "My lawyers have filed an injunction this morning. You'll find that deeds can be complicated, especially when the original down payment came from a trust you have no access to. You're kicking a widow out the day after the funeral." I looked at Victoria, then Elena. "Really? This is who you are." "Don't play the victim, Clara," Victoria chimed in, stepping down from the stool. "It doesn't suit you. You're tough, right? Isn't that what the army teaches you? Go live in the barracks, leave the nice houses to people who know how to appreciate them." Elena pointed a manicured finger toward the foyer. "The movers will take your personal effects to a storage unit in North Charleston. I've paid for the first month. Consider it a severance package. You have 2 hours to pack your clothes. Anything left behind goes to the dump." I looked at the trash bin by Elena's feet. I saw the glint of the Purple Heart ribbon amidst the discarded junk mail and dust bunnies. The medal Marcus earned when shrapnel tore into his leg in Kandahar. He had bled for that. He had screamed in agony for that. And she had thrown it away like a used tissue. My hand, the one not holding the flag, curled into a fist at my side. I squeezed so hard my fingernails cut into the calloused skin of my palm. I felt the skin break. I felt the warm, sticky trickle of blood. The pain was sharp, grounding. It cut through the red haze of fury. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to use the combat training ingrained in my muscle memory to clear this room of hostiles. But I didn't. Because that sting in my palm, that sharp physical pain of being dismissed and devalued, it felt familiar. It felt exactly like the first time I sat at a dinner table with these people, 8 years ago. The memory washed over me, pulling me out of the burning present and dragging me back to the cold, bitter start of it all. The sharp sting of my fingernails piercing my palm in the hallway wasn't just physical pain. It was a phantom sensation, a ghost of a feeling that dragged me violently back 8 years, to the very first time I realized that to the Colemans, I would never be family. I would always be the help, or worse, a stain on their pristine linen. I was 27 then, fresh out of officer candidate school, and Marcus had finally convinced me to meet his parents. The venue was the Palmerston Country Club, a place where the air smelled of old leather, expensive bourbon, and generational wealth. I remember checking my reflection in the restroom mirror 3 times. I was wearing a navy blue dress I'd bought off the clearance rack at Macy's. It had a modest neckline and fell just below the knee. In Ohio, it would have been considered Sunday best. But the moment I walked into the private dining room and saw Elena, I felt like I was wearing a burlap sack. Elena and Victoria were draped in silk that moved like water. Their clothes didn't have brand names you could find at the mall. They were tailored, custom-fitted armor designed to intimidate. We sat at a table set with more silverware than I had people in my entire family. I was terrified of using the wrong fork, so I waited for Elena to move first. The first course was she crab soup, a Charleston classic rich with cream and sherry. I was nervous, my hand shaking slightly as I dipped my spoon into the bowl and brought it toward me. "Oh, bless your heart, Clara." Elena's voice rang out, soft and sweet, cutting through the hushed dining room like a bell. I froze, the spoon halfway to my mouth. "You're eating it like a longshoreman, dear," she said, offering a tight, pitying smile to the table next to us. "In the South, we spoon our soup away from us, like we are rowing a little boat out to sea, not shoveling coal into a furnace." Heat rushed to my face, hotter than the soup. I'm sorry, I didn't know." "Clearly," Victoria snickered, hiding her mouth behind a crystal goblet of water. Marcus shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "It doesn't matter, Mom. It's just soup." "Manners always matter, Marcus," Raymond interjected. He didn't look at me. He was busy inspecting the label on the wine bottle the waiter had presented. "So, Clara, Marcus tells me you're in the Army. Logistics, was it?" "Yes, sir," I answered, trying to regain my composure. "I'm a quartermaster officer. I manage supply lines, ensuring our troops have everything from ammunition to food in hostile environments. It's actually quite complex." Raymond waved a hand dismissively, cutting me off. "Sounds loud and dirty." He finally looked at me, his eyes cold and assessing. "The Colemans have always been architects of society, Clara. We build the skylines. We fund the museums. We use our brains to accumulate power. We don't use our muscles to carry boxes in the mud. That's work for a different class of people." I felt small. I felt like the dirt he was describing. But I had prepared for this. I told myself they just didn't know me yet. I had a peace offering. "I brought you something, Elena," I said, reaching into my purse. I pulled out a scarf. It wasn't just any scarf. For 3 months, I had skipped lunches to save up for 3 skeins of pure, high-grade cashmere yarn. I had spent every free evening knitting it by hand, a complex cable-knit pattern that made my fingers cramp. It was soft, cloud gray, and woven with every ounce of hope I had for this relationship. Elena took it. She didn't unfold it. She didn't touch it to her cheek to feel the softness. She held it by the corner, as if checking for fleas. "Oh," she said. "Handmade. How rustic." "Thank you, Clara." She placed it on the edge of the table, dangerously close to the breadbasket, and turned back to talk to the waiter about the vintage of the Cabernet. 5 minutes later, disaster struck. The busboy, a young kid who looked terrified of Raymond, reached across to clear the bread plates. His elbow clipped Raymond's wine glass. The heavy crystal goblet tipped. Red wine, a rich, dark Cabernet, flooded across the pristine white tablecloth, heading straight for Elena's cream-colored silk lap. "Oh my God!" Elena shrieked, jumping up. Without a second of hesitation, she grabbed the nearest absorbent thing on the table. My scarf. She bunched up the gray cashmere, the wool I had starved to buy, the pattern I had agonized over, and slammed it down into the puddle of wine. She scrubbed the tablecloth frantically, turning the soft gray wool into a sodden, purple, dripping mess. "Elena, that's Clara's gift," Marcus gasped, his eyes widening. Elena tossed the soaked, ruined bundle into the busboy's hands with a look of disgust. "Get rid of that. It smells like wet dog now anyway." Thank God it wasn't a real textile, or the stain would have set instantly. It absorbed the wine perfectly, though. Good utility. She sat back down, smoothing her dress, and smiled at me. Crisis averted. Good thinking on my part, don't you think? I stared at the busboy retreating with my hard work, my love, my offering. Now just a rag in his bin. My heart shattered in my chest. I waited for Marcus to yell. I waited for him to stand up, to throw his napkin down, to tell his mother that she was cruel and heartless. But he didn't. Instead, I felt a hand slip into mine under the table. Marcus squeezed my fingers hard. His hand was shaking. He was looking down at his plate, his jaw tight, his ears burning red. He was ashamed, but he was too afraid of his father's money and his mother's manipulation to say a word. That squeeze was an apology. It was a silent plea. "Please endure this for me. Please don't make a scene. I love you, but I can't fight them. I squeezed back. Because I loved him. Because I thought love meant enduring humiliation to keep the peace. I didn't know then that silence is just permission given to abusers. If you have ever poured your heart into a gift, a gesture, or a relationship, only to have it treated like trash by the people you were trying to impress, please hit that like button and comment. I see you. Let's show the world that we support each other, even when our own families don't. Back in the hallway, 8 years later, the memory faded, leaving only the cold reality. Marcus was gone. The hand that used to squeeze mine under the table in silent apology was cold in the ground. There was no one left to hold my hand. I looked down at my fist. The blood from where my nails had broken the skin was real. I unclenched my fingers. Marcus couldn't protect me then. He couldn't protect me now. But looking at the movers hauling away the life we built, I realized something. I didn't need a hand to squeeze under the table anymore. I needed a weapon. And I remembered exactly where Marcus kept the only thing in this house that Julian and Raymond hadn't touched yet. That specific kind of rage, the one that starts in your gut and burns its way up to your throat, doesn't come from a single event. It's an accumulation. It's a slow poisoning. For years, I watched the Coleman siblings feed off Marcus like leeches attached to a host, draining him dry while I was the one working double shifts to replenish the blood supply. I remember the day Julian came to us with his vision. It was a Sunday afternoon, about 3 years ago. He sat on our porch, nursing a craft beer I had bought, outlining his plan for a tech startup. He used a lot of buzzwords he'd probably picked up from a YouTube guru: disruptive, scalable, synergy. He needed $50,000 in seed money. "It's a sure thing, Mark," Julian had said, leaning back with that arrogant ease of someone who has never had to worry about rent. "I just need the capital to get the app off the ground." Marcus looked at me. I shook my head, barely perceptible. We didn't have $50,000 to gamble. We were saving for a renovation on the master bath. But then, the phone rang. It was Raymond. "He's your brother, Marcus," Raymond's voice boomed through the receiver, loud enough for me to hear. "The family wealth is for the family. You have a responsibility to lift him up. Don't be selfish." So, Marcus wrote the check. He depleted our savings account because family supports family. 2 weeks later, I drove past a dealership on Savannah Highway. There was Julian, laughing with a blonde girl who looked like she was still in high school, leaning against a pre-owned cherry red Porsche 911. The startup never launched. The app never existed. But Julian got his new toy, and when Marcus asked about the business plan later, Julian just shrugged and said the market wasn't ready for his genius. The 50 grand was gone, absorbed into bottle service in Miami and high-octane gasoline. But Julian was just the loud, obvious parasite. Victoria was the silent killer. Victoria owned a boutique on King Street, nestled among the high-end retailers. It sold beige linen tunics that cost $300 and scented candles that smelled like driftwood and money. The store was always empty. It was a vanity project, a black hole for cash. At the time, I was working myself into the ground. I would pull a 10-hour shift at the base, managing logistics for a brigade deployment, dealing with endless spreadsheets and demanding commanders. Then, I would drive straight to the Charleston Veterinary Center. I'd swap my OCPs for blue scrubs and work another 6 hours as a vet tech, cleaning up dog vomit, holding terrified cats for blood draws, and mopping floors until midnight. I did it because the roof on the Victorian house needed repairs, and Marcus's salary as a veterinarian, while decent, couldn't support his father's demands and our bills simultaneously. One rainy Tuesday, Victoria called. She was sobbing. Her supplier was holding a shipment because she hadn't paid her last 3 invoices. She needed $10,000 by 5 o'clock, or she'd lose everything. Marcus was in surgery, so I went. I drove to King Street in my beat-up Ford, still wearing my scrubs from the clinic, smelling faintly of antiseptic and wet dog. I had the check in my pocket, money I'd earmarked for our retirement fund. I walked into the boutique. The bell above the door chimed softly. Victoria didn't see me. She was behind the counter, chatting with a woman who had a Louis Vuitton bag perched on her arm. It's just so hard, Victoria was sighing, adjusting a display of silk scarves. Running a business is exhausting, and I can't expect any help from my brother. He's completely whipped. Really? The customer asked, feigning interest. Oh, completely. Victoria lowered her voice, but in the quiet shop, it carried perfectly. He married this girl from Ohio. Total trailer trash. She's a gold digger, plain and simple. She saw the Coleman name and latched on like a tick. I honestly don't know what he sees in her. She has zero class. I froze by a rack of overpriced tunics. The check in my pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Gold digger. The word slapped me across the face. I was the one scrubbing floors at midnight. I was the one eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch so we could afford to fix the plumbing. I was the one writing the check to save her failing vanity project. And I was the gold digger. I wanted to storm up to the counter. I wanted to tear the check into confetti and throw it in her face. I wanted to scream that her business was a joke and her brother was the only reason she wasn't working at a drive-thru. But I didn't. I reached for my phone and put on my earbuds. I hit play on my Jocko podcast playlist. Jocko Willing's gravelly voice filled my head. Discipline equals freedom. Don't let your emotions control you. Take ownership. Hold the line. I breathed in. I breathed out. I channeled every ounce of military bearing I had. I walked up to the counter, placed the check on the glass surface, and looked Victoria dead in the eye. Here's the loan Marcus promised, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Make it last, Victoria. She turned pale, her eyes darting to the customer, then back to me. She snatched the check without a word. I turned on my heel and walked out. I didn't do it for her. I did it so Marcus wouldn't have to listen to her cry later. That was the dynamic. They took, we gave, and they despised us for it. And it all started before we even said, I do. It went back to the prenup. A week before our wedding, Raymond had summoned me to his office downtown. It was a cold, glass-walled room overlooking the harbor. He didn't offer me water. He slid a thick document across the mahogany desk. This is a prenuptial agreement, Raymond had said, not looking up from his laptop. Standard procedure for a family of our stature. It protects the Coleman assets from potential liabilities, investment risks. He looked at me then. You are the risk, Clara. You have debt. You have no lineage. If this marriage fails, and statistically, mixed-class marriages often do, you leave with what you came with, which is essentially nothing. He expected me to fight. He expected me to cry or demand a lawyer. I picked up the pen. I didn't turn a single page. I didn't read the clauses about alimony or property division. I signed on the last page, pressing down so hard the ink bled through to the wood. I'm signing this, I told him, staring him down. Not because I'm scared of you, but to prove that I don't want a dime of your money. I love your son. That's something you can't buy, and it's something you clearly don't understand. I walked out of that office thinking I had won a moral victory. I thought proving I wasn't greedy would earn their respect. I was naive. They didn't see my signature as an act of love. They saw it as submission. They saw it as a green light to treat me as disposable. And now, standing in the hallway of the house I had fought for, paid for, and bled for, I realized the ultimate irony. I looked at the pile of bills on the side table, unpaid notices that Julian and Victoria had ignored while Marcus lay dying. And right next to them, half buried under a flyer for a pizza delivery, was the piece of paper that had changed everything. The diagnosis. The financial bleeding was nothing compared to the war we had just lost. But as I stared at those bills, a cold realization washed over me. The prenup Raymond had forced me to sign? He thought it was his shield. He had no idea that in his arrogance, he had left a back door wide open. They thought I was the risk. They were about to find out just how dangerous a risk I really was. The piece of paper that changed our lives wasn't a bill or a lawsuit. It was a single page of medical letterhead, crisp and white, that felt heavier than a granite tombstone in my hands. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The oncologist, a kind man with tired eyes at MUSC Health, had used words like aggressive, palliative, and 6 months. But all I heard was a static noise, a high-pitched ringing that drowned out the world. Marcus, my strong, gentle Marcus, who had spent his life healing animals, was being eaten alive from the inside. You would expect a family to rally. In the movies, or maybe in the Ohio town I grew up in, a diagnosis like this brings lasagna casseroles to the front porch and tearful vigils in the living room. But this was the Colemans. When Marcus called his father to break the news, Raymond didn't ask about pain management. He didn't ask if Marcus was scared. He didn't even drop the businesslike cadence of his voice. "That's unfortunate," Raymond had said, the line crackling with the distance of his emotional detachment. "Have you looked at the succession plan for the clinic? We need to ensure the asset value doesn't depreciate if you're unavailable. We should discuss liquidation strategies before the end of the fiscal quarter." He was talking about his son's death as if it were a depreciating real estate asset. Elena sent a floral arrangement, lilies, the flower of funerals, while Marcus was still alive. The card read simply, "Thinking of you. E and R." 2 weeks later, against my better judgment, we attended a wedding. It was a cousin of Marcus's, getting married at one of those sprawling plantations on the Ashley River. Ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss, waiters in white jackets serving mint juleps, a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon. It was the epitome of Southern grace. Marcus insisted on going. He was already losing weight, his tuxedo hanging loosely on his frame, his skin taking on a yellowish tint. "I want to see everyone," he had whispered to me. "One last time, maybe. Maybe if they see me, they'll remember they loved me." It broke my heart. He was still seeking their approval on death's door. I pushed his wheelchair over the crushed shell path, parking him in a quiet corner of the garden near a blooming trellis of jasmine. He was exhausted. "I need some water, Clara," he rasped, patting my hand. "I'll be right back," I kissed his forehead. "Don't move." I made my way toward the bar, navigating through the sea of pastel dresses and seersucker suits. The line was long. I decided to cut through the rose garden to find a waiter. That's when I heard them. The voices were low but distinct, carrying through the thick, humid air. I stopped. Through the dense leaves of a large camellia bush, I saw the flicker of a lighter. The smell of expensive cigar smoke wafted toward me. It was Raymond and Julian. They were standing in a secluded alcove, away from the guests. "He looks like a corpse already," Julian said. There was no sadness in his voice, just a detached observation, like he was looking at roadkill. "How long did the doctor say?" 3 months. Maybe 4 if his heart is stubborn, Raymond replied. I heard the clink of ice in a glass. But looking at him today, I'd bet on 2. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen, my shoes sinking into the soft earth. "So, what's the timeline?" Julian asked, sounding eager. "I've already talked to a contractor about the master suite. I want to knock down that wall between the bedroom and the study. Open it up. Make it a real bachelor pad." I felt bile rise in my throat. Marcus was sitting 50 feet away, breathing, thinking, loving, and they were already renovating his bedroom. "Patience, son," Raymond soothed him. "We have to be surgical about this. The moment the heart monitor flatlines, and I mean the minute he is pronounced, I want you at that house with the locksmith. I've already drafted the work order." "What about her?" Julian asked. "The soldier girl. She's going to be a problem." Raymond chuckled, a dry rattling sound. "Clara? She's a non-factor. She signed the prenup, remember? She waived her rights to the estate, the business, the real estate. She gets nothing. She's essentially a squatter the moment Marcus dies. We change the locks, we liquidate the veterinary equipment to cover the taxes, and she goes back to the trailer park she crawled out of." "She's been paying the bills, though," Julian said, taking a drag of his cigar. "I saw the checks on the counter when I stopped by." "That's her stupidity, not our liability," Raymond said coldly. "If she wants to sink her salary into a sinking ship, that's charity. It doesn't buy her equity. Now, fix your tie. The bride is coming." I didn't get the water. I turned around, my legs trembling so violently I could barely walk. The world was spinning. The beautiful music, the laughter of the guests, the scent of jasmine, it all felt toxic, poisonous. I made it back to Marcus. I knelt beside his wheelchair, clutching the armrest to keep from collapsing. Clara? Marcus looked at me, his eyes hazy with pain but still sharp. Where's the water? You look like you've seen a ghost. I saw monsters, Marcus, I whispered, my voice shaking. I saw monsters, I told him. I couldn't keep it inside. I told him every word. The renovation plans, the locksmith, the liquidation, the way they laughed about his expiration date. I expected him to cry. I expected him to slump in that chair and finally give up, crushed by the realization that his family didn't love him. They only loved what he could leave them. But Marcus didn't cry. For the first time in the 8 years I had known him, the gentle look in his eyes vanished. The man who apologized for existing, who signed checks to keep the peace, who let his mother treat his wife like a servant, that man died in that garden. He gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. His knuckles turned white. He sat up straighter, wincing at the pain in his abdomen, but ignoring it. He looked toward the trellis where his father and brother were smoking cigars and planning his erasure. They want the master suite, Marcus said, his voice low, raspy but terrifyingly steady. They want to liquidate my life? Marcus. I reached for his hand. He pulled a small leather-bound book from his tuxedo pocket. His pocket New Testament. He didn't open it. He just held it like a stone. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Marcus recited. We all know the verse. It's the verse of comfort. But Marcus wasn't reciting it for comfort. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. Do you know the next part, Clara? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. For thou art with me. No, Marcus cut in. The rod and the staff, thy rod and thy staff. He looked at his father across the lawn. A rod isn't for leaning on, Clara. A rod is a weapon. It's a club used to beat back the wolves. He turned to me, and a grim, cold smile touched his pale lips. They think I'm a dying dog they can kick on the way out, he whispered. They want a war? Okay, I'm going to give them a war. Get me out of here. Take me to Charles Peaton. Peaton, I blinked. The lawyer your dad hates? The shark? Exactly, Marcus said. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die standing up, and I'm going to make sure that when they come for you, they step on a landmine. I wheeled him out of that garden, leaving tracks in the crushed shells. We didn't say goodbye to anyone. The music played on, masking the sound of the first shot being fired in a war that would tear the Coleman dynasty apart. Charles Peaton's law office was located in a narrow brick building on Broad Street, sandwiched between a high-end art gallery and a bank that had been there since the Civil War. It didn't have a flashy sign, just a small brass plaque that hadn't been polished in a decade. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish, old leather, and expensive tobacco. It was the smell of secrets. Charles Peaton was a legend in Charleston, but not the kind you invited to dinner parties. He was the kind you called when you wanted to destroy someone at a dinner party. He was 70, with a face like a crumpled map and eyes that missed nothing. He had represented Raymond Coleman twice in the 80s, and they had parted ways when Raymond tried to stiff him on a bill. Peaton never forgot a debt. I wheeled Marcus into the office. Peaton didn't offer sympathy. He didn't offer water. He looked at Marcus's gaunt face, then at the fire in his eyes, and simply asked, Who are we killing today? Metaphorically speaking, of course. My father, Marcus rasped, and the legacy he thinks he controls. Peaton smiled. It was a terrifying expression. Music to my ears. Let's look at the battlefield. Marcus laid it all out. The cancer. The eavesdropped conversation in the garden. The plan to change the locks. The prenup I had signed. Peaton reviewed the prenup, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He hummed, flipping pages. Standard Coleman contract. Draconian. Ironclad. If you divorce, Clara gets nothing. If you die and your assets go to probate, Raymond will tie this up in court for 5 years. He'll bleed Clara dry in legal fees before she ever sees a dime. He knows she can't afford to fight him. That's his plan, I said, my voice steady. He calls it liquidation. However, Peyton slammed the folder shut, dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Raymond Coleman has always had one fatal flaw. He assumes he's the smartest man in the room. He assumes the prenup protects the family assets. But he forgets that the law has back doors. Peyton pulled out a fresh legal pad. We are going to bypass the probate court entirely. We are going to make the will irrelevant regarding the house. How? I asked. Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, Peyton said, savoring the words like a fine wine. He leaned forward. Listen closely, Clara. In South Carolina, if a property is held as tenants in common, your share goes to your estate when you die, which means it goes to probate and Raymond can contest it. But if we retitle the deed today, while Marcus is of sound mind, to joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, the house operates outside of the estate. He mimicked a sliding motion with his hands. The second Marcus's heart stops beating, literally the exact second, his interest in the house evaporates and transfers 100% to you. Automatically, instantly. It doesn't go to court, it doesn't go to the executors, it doesn't pass go, it becomes yours, solely. Raymond can waive that prenup around all he wants. It won't apply to property you already own fully by operation of law. I looked at Marcus. He was nodding. He knew this. This was the nuclear weapon he had mentioned. But we're not stopping there, Marcus whispered. He coughed, a wet, painful sound, but waved away my concern. I want to hurt them, Charles. I want to make sure they can't touch her cash assets either. The in terrorem clause, Peyton nodded, scribbling furiously. Also known as the no contest clause. Exactly, Marcus said. I want to leave Julian, Victoria, and Elena a specific bequest, $5,000 each. 5,000? I frowned. Marcus, that's $15,000 we could use. It's bait, Clara, Marcus explained, his eyes gleaming. If I leave them nothing, they can sue, claiming I forgot them or was under undue influence. They can drag you to court. But if I leave them a gift, even a small insulting one, I can attach a condition. Peyton finished the thought. The condition is, if any beneficiary challenges any part of this estate plan, or tries to evict Clara, or sues for more money, they instantly forfeit their $5,000 gift and are disinherited completely. Plus, they become liable for all legal fees. It was brilliant. It was vicious. It relied entirely on their greed. Julian and Victoria were cash poor and desperate to maintain appearances. They would hate the $5,000, but they would be terrified of losing it. It was a muzzle made of money. Draw it up, Marcus said. We signed today. I'll have the deed transfer ready in an hour, Peyton said, reaching for his phone to buzz his paralegal. And the updated living trust. We're going to move the bank accounts into it as well. By the time you leave this office, Marcus, on paper, you will be a pauper, and Clara will be the CEO of your life. While Peyton and his team went to work, typing up the documents that would redefine my future, Marcus asked for a pen and paper. One last thing, he said. Marcus, you need to rest, I pleaded, seeing the sweat beading on his forehead. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the pain was returning. No, he said firmly. The legal trap is for their wallets. This, he tapped the pen against the paper, this is for their souls, if they have them. For 45 minutes, the only sound in the office was the scratching of Marcus's pen against the yellow legal pad. He didn't write with the flowery, poetic prose he used to use in my birthday cards. He wrote with jagged, hard strokes. He stopped only to catch his breath or wipe his brow. When he finished, he folded the letter into 3 crisp sections. He didn't put it in an envelope. He handed it to Peyton. Read this to them, Marcus said. After I'm gone, after you drop the bomb about the house, when they are screaming and threatening Clara, read them this. Peyton took the letter. For a second, the hard-nosed lawyer looked almost sad. It will be my pleasure, son. The paralegal came in with the documents, the deed, the trust, the updated will with the poison pill clauses. Marcus's hand shook as he held the pen over the signature line of the deed transfer. I put my hand over his, steadying it. Are you sure? I whispered. This is your family legacy. The Coleman name. Marcus looked at me. You are my legacy, Clara. You are the only Coleman who ever acted like one. He signed. The ink was dark and permanent. Marcus Anthony Coleman. He dropped the pen. It rolled across the mahogany desk with a hollow clatter. It's done, Peyton said, stamping the document with a heavy notary seal. Thump. The sound echoed like a gavel striking a block. I'll file this with the county clerk tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., before Raymond even has his morning coffee. Marcus leaned back in his wheelchair, his eyes closing. He looked exhausted, drained of every ounce of life force, but for the first time since the diagnosis, he looked peaceful. The fear was gone. Let's go home, Clara, he whispered. I'm ready now. I wheeled him out into the Charleston evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows down Broad Street. We were leaving the war room, and the trap was set. Now, all we had to do was wait for the inevitable. We had just armed a landmine, and in a few short weeks, my grieving family was going to step right on it. The last week of Marcus's life, our living room, the one with the heart pine floors we had sanded together, ceased to be a home. It became a waiting room for death. We had moved the furniture to the garage to make room for a hospital bed, a rhythmic oxygen concentrator that clicked and sighed every 3 seconds, and a rolling table filled with morphine and saline. The hospice nurse, a saint of a woman named Brenda, told me it would be soon. His breathing is changing, she'd said gently, adjusting the blinds to keep the harsh Charleston sun out of his eyes. It's the Cheney-Stokes respiration. The pauses are getting longer. I wanted silence. I wanted to hold his hand and whisper to him about the time we got lost hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains, or the time we adopted our first dog. I wanted peace. Instead, I got the Colemans. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Raymond and Julian walked in without knocking. They didn't bring flowers. They didn't bring comfort. Raymond brought a heavy-duty, retractable metal tape measure. Marcus was sleeping, his chest rising and falling in shallow, jagged gasps. He looked so small in that bed, his skin translucent, his cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Raymond didn't even look at him. He walked straight past his dying son to the large bay window overlooking the street. Snap. The sound of the metal tape measure retracting was like a gunshot in the quiet room. 12 feet across, Raymond muttered, jotting something down in a leather notebook. If we tear out these built-ins, Julian, we can expand the view. Open concept is what sells right now. But for your bachelor pad, you might want these windows replaced with floor-to-ceiling glass. Get some of that modern aesthetic. Julian stood at the foot of Marcus's deathbed, scrolling on his phone. He looked bored. Yeah, but the floors, Dad. This pine is ancient. It creaks. I want white oak, something lighter. This place feels like a museum. I was sitting in a chair by Marcus's head, holding a sponge to his dry lips. My hand froze. He can hear you, I whispered, my voice trembling. He is right here. He is still alive. Raymond turned to me, looking annoyed that the furniture was speaking. He's heavily sedated, Clara. He doesn't know if he's in Charleston or Timbuktu. We're just being practical. No sense in wasting time once the transition occurs. Contractors are booked months out. Zzzzt. Snap. He measured the wall behind Marcus's head. Yeah, this wall goes. We'll need a structural engineer, but it's doable. The door opened again. Elena drifted in. She was holding a plastic deli container from Harris Teeter. The price tag was still on the lid. $6.99 chicken noodle. She placed it on the table next to the morphine, pushing aside a photo of our wedding to make room. The container was cold. Condensation had already made the label soggy. I brought sustenance, she announced, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. How is he? Dying, Elena, I said, feeling the hot tears prick my eyes. He is dying. Well, she sighed, smoothing her skirt. We all have our time. She looked at me, her expression shifting from indifference to a faux concerned pity that felt like a slap. Speaking of time, Clara, I was looking at listings this morning. There are some very affordable studio apartments in North Charleston, near the industrial park. I stared at her. What? For you, dear, she said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. Once the funeral is over, you'll need to vacate. Obviously, you can't afford a place downtown on a soldier's salary. And with the rental market being what it is, well, I thought you should start looking now. You don't want to be homeless and a widow in the same week. It's just bad optics. She was evicting me, while my husband, her stepson, was fighting for his last breaths 3 feet away. She was browsing rental listings for me in the crime-ridden part of town. Get out, I whispered. Excuse me? Raymond stopped measuring. I said get out. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Get out to the porch, get out of his sight. If you want to measure the walls for his coffin, do it outside. Maybe it was the look in my eyes, the look of a woman who had seen combat and was currently holding a line of defense, but they actually backed down. Raymond scoffed, muttering about hysteria, and they retreated to the front porch. Through the glass, I could see Julian lighting a cigarette, blowing smoke against the window pane. I sat back down. Marcus's eyes fluttered open. The commotion had stirred him. He turned his head slowly. The blue of his eyes was faded, grayed over by the shadow of the end. He squeezed my hand. His grip was weak, nothing more than the weight of a feather, but I felt it in my soul. Clara, he breathed. The sound was wet, rattling. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. The line, he whispered, struggling to focus on my face. Hold. The line. It was a phrase from Jocko Willink. It was something we said to each other when the deployments were long, when the money was tight, when the world felt heavy. Hold the line, don't give an inch. Stay disciplined. I will, I promised, kissing his knuckles. I won't let them break through. I promise. He closed his eyes. He let out a long sigh, like he was finally putting down a heavy rucksack he had carried for 35 years. And then, silence. The rhythmic whoosh-click of the oxygen machine continued, but the chest beneath the sheet was still. Brenda, the nurse, stepped forward. She checked his pulse. She checked his pupils. She looked at me with infinite sadness and nodded. He's gone, honey. Time of death, 4:12 p.m. I didn't scream. I didn't wail. I just laid my head on his chest, right over his silent heart, and let the first sob break loose. This is the moment where I ask you, have you ever seen greed overshadow grief? If you believe that a family should be mourning their loss instead of measuring the floorboards, please hit that like button and comment, heartless, below. Let's show the world that we value people over property. The door opened. I thought they were coming in to say goodbye. I thought, surely, now that he was gone, the reality would hit them. Raymond walked in. He looked at the nurse, who was turning off the oxygen machine. He looked at me, sobbing on his son's chest. He didn't come to the bedside. He didn't touch Marcus. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number he clearly had on speed dial. It's Raymond, he said into the phone, his voice loud and clear in the silent room. He's dead. 4:12 p.m. Yeah, call the bank. Freeze the joint accounts immediately. I want a padlock on the safety deposit box within the hour. And get the paperwork ready for the eviction. I don't want her taking anything of value. He hung up. He looked at me, his eyes dry, his face calculating. I'm calling the funeral home to pick up the body, he said to me. You have 2 days to get your affairs in order before the service. After that, you're trespassing. He turned and walked out to tell Julian the good news that the renovation could finally begin. I stayed there, holding Marcus's cooling hand. They thought the war was over because the soldier had fallen. They had no idea that the soldier had passed the ammunition to me, and I was just waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. The humidity in Charleston on the day of the funeral was oppressive, a wet, heavy blanket that made the black wool of my dress cling to my skin like a second layer of grief. The air inside the historic Episcopal Church wasn't much better, despite the industrial fans whirring in the corners. It smelled of stale incense, expensive lilies, and the distinct, sharp scent of old money. I walked through the heavy oak doors, my head held high. I was the widow. In every etiquette book, in every tradition known to civilized society, the widow walks first. The widow sits in the front pew, closest to the casket. The widow is the anchor of the mourning procession. But as I started down the center aisle, my eyes fixed on the mahogany casket draped in the flag I had rescued from the pizza box 2 days ago, a shadow stepped into my path. He was a large man, wide as a refrigerator, wearing a black suit that strained at the shoulders and an earpiece coiled behind his ear. He wasn't a church usher. He was private security. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice low but firm, blocking my way to the front row. "I'm his wife," I said, my voice hoarse from 2 days of crying. "Please move." "I'm sorry, ma'am." He didn't budge. He crossed his hands in front of him. "Mr. Coleman has given strict instructions. The first pew is reserved for the immediate nuclear family only, parents and siblings." I stared at him, the blood draining from my face. I am his immediate family. I am his wife. "The seating chart is final," the guard said, gesturing to a row 3 benches back. "You're listed in the Friends and Guests section, row 3. Please take your seat. We don't want to cause a scene in the house of God, do we?" I looked past him. In the front row, Raymond sat stoically, staring ahead. Elena was dabbing dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Julian was checking his watch. Victoria was fixing her hair in a compact mirror. There was an empty space next to Julian, a deliberate gap where I should have been. A scene. That's what they wanted. They wanted the trashy girl from Ohio to scream and shout so they could point and say, "See? She has no class." I swallowed the scream building in my throat. I stepped back. I walked to the third row and sat down between a distant cousin I had never met and a former business partner of Raymond's. I sat there, staring at the back of Julian's head, feeling the eyes of 300 of Charleston's elite boring into my back. The widow in the third row. The message was clear. I was already an outsider. Then came the eulogy. Raymond walked up to the pulpit. He adjusted the microphone, looking every bit the grieving patriarch. He spoke for 20 minutes. He spoke about Marcus's childhood, his time at the prep school, his Coleman blood, and his potential. He spoke about how Marcus was a bridge to the future for his brother Julian. He thanked Elena for being a rock during this difficult time. He never said my name. Not once. He erased 8 years of marriage. He erased the woman who held Marcus's hand through chemotherapy. He erased the wife who worked 2 jobs to keep his roof from leaking. In Raymond's version of history, Marcus died a bachelor son, tragic and alone, surrounded only by his loving parents. I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, fingernails digging into the fabric of my dress. I wasn't sad anymore. The grief had been burned away by a cold, white-hot fury. The service ended and we moved to the cemetery. Magnolia Cemetery is beautiful, a sprawling garden of the dead with ancient oaks and moss-draped statues. We gathered around the open grave. The heat was intensifying, the cicadas buzzing a deafening chorus. The priest finished the committal prayers. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Raymond stepped forward to the edge of the grave. He wasn't holding a handful of dirt to throw onto the casket. He was holding a glass of scotch he must have brought from the limo. He turned to the crowd, raising the glass. "To Marcus," Raymond announced, his voice carrying over the silence. "He returns to the earth, but his legacy remains with the family. And to ensure that legacy lives on, I am proud to announce that his brother, Julian, will be moving into the family estate on East Bay Street immediately. He will restore the home to its former glory, just as Marcus would have wanted." A murmur went through the crowd. He was announcing a real estate transfer over an open grave. He was effectively evicting me publicly, framing it as a tribute to the dead. I looked at Julian. He smirked, taking a sip from a flask he had hidden in his jacket. He looked at the house keys dangling from his finger, my house keys, and winked at me. I stood there, frozen. The disrespect was so absolute, so complete, it felt surreal. Then I felt a presence beside me. It was Victoria. She had moved back from the front row to stand next to me as the crowd began to disperse. She looked me up and down, her eyes landing on my face. She leaned in close, the smell of her expensive, cloying perfume mixing with the scent of the damp earth. "You look terrible, Clara," she whispered, her voice a poisonous hiss. "Don't cry too loud, you're ruining your face. And honestly, it's smearing that cheap drugstore mascara all over your cheeks. You look like a raccoon." She pulled back, giving me a pitying smile for the benefit of the onlookers. "Go pack your bags, honey. The movers are coming at 8 a.m. tomorrow." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet metallic click of a safety being disengaged on a weapon. I stopped crying. I reached into my purse. I didn't pull out a tissue. I pulled out my phone. I wiped the cheap mascara from under my eye with my thumb. I looked at the screen. The signal was strong. I opened my messages. I found the contact saved as The Shark. I typed 2 words, Omega, go. I hit send. I watched the bubble turn blue. I watched the delivered notification appear. I looked up at Raymond, who was laughing with a business associate near the hearse. I looked at Julian, spinning my keys. I looked at Victoria, checking her makeup. They thought they had buried Marcus. They thought they had buried me. They didn't know that the text message I just sent had initiated a chain reaction that was already traveling down the fiber optic cables to the county clerk's office, to the sheriff's department, and to Charles Peaton's desk. I put my phone back in my purse. I didn't say a word to anyone. I turned my back on the Colemans and walked toward my car. The widow in the 3rd row was gone. The major had just taken the field, and the enemy had no idea they were already surrounded. The text message I sent at the cemetery, Omega, go, had taken exactly 12 minutes to manifest into reality. I was back on the porch of the Victorian house on East Bay Street. The scene was exactly as I had left it in the morning, frozen in a grotesque tableau of entitlement. The movers were still hauling boxes. Victoria was still smirking. And Raymond Coleman was standing in the doorway, blocking my entry with the arrogance of a man who believes he owns the very air he breathes. "You have some nerve coming back here," Raymond sneered, checking his Rolex. "The 2 hours are up, Clara. You are officially trespassing. I was just about to call the police to have you removed." "Don't bother," I said, my voice calm, almost bored. "I saved you the trouble." Raymond frowned, confused. "What?" Before he could answer, the sound of tires crunching on gravel shattered the afternoon quiet. It wasn't the polite purr of a luxury sedan. It was the aggressive, heavy growl of engines meant for pursuit. 2 vehicles turned into the long driveway. The first was a black Lincoln Town Car with tinted windows. The second was a Charleston County Sheriff's Cruiser, lights flashing silently, the blue and red bouncing off the white columns of the porch. Raymond's face lit up with a smug satisfaction. "Well, look at that. They're prompt. I suppose someone at the precinct knows who pays the taxes in this town." He smoothed his tie and stepped down the stairs to greet them, putting on his best aggrieved homeowner face. "Officers," Raymond called out as the sheriff's door opened. "Thank you for coming. This woman is refusing to vacate my property. She's becoming belligerent." A massive boot hit the pavement. Sheriff Miller stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4", wearing his aviators despite the cloud cover. He wasn't just a deputy. He was the sheriff, an elected official who answered to the voters, not the country club board. Sheriff Miller adjusted his belt, ignored Raymond's outstretched hand, and walked right past him. He walked straight up the steps to where I was standing. He took off his sunglasses. "Major Ramsey," he said, tipping the brim of his hat, "I got your text. Are you safe?" "I'm safe, Sheriff," I replied. "Just dealing with a little confusion regarding property rights." "Good to hear," Miller smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "By the way, Rex is running on that back leg like a puppy again. That surgery you performed was a miracle. My wife says you're the only vet she trusts." Raymond stood frozen on the bottom step, his hand still extended into empty air. "Sheriff, do you know this woman? She's a squatter. I want her arrested." "Careful, Raymond," a sharp, gravelly voice cut through the air. Charles Peaton stepped out of the black Lincoln. He moved slower than the sheriff, leaning on a cane with a silver handle, but his presence carried more weight. He held a thick leather briefcase. "Charles?" Raymond blinked, looking between the lawyer and the sheriff. What are you doing here? This is a family matter. It was a family matter, Peyton said, climbing the stairs one by one, the tap-tap-tap of his cane echoing like a countdown. Now, it's a legal matter, and you are on the wrong side of it. We moved inside. The air conditioning was humming. Julian was still on the leather recliner, watching ESPN, a bag of potato chips resting on his chest. Elena was instructing a mover on how to wrap a vase. They froze as our entourage entered. The sheriff stood by the door, arms crossed. Peyton walked to the coffee table, right in front of Julian. Thud. Peyton dropped a heavy file folder onto the mahogany table. The sound was loud enough that Julian flinched, knocking his bag of chips onto the floor. Greasy crumbs scattered across the rug Raymond claimed I had soiled. What is this? Elena asked, clutching her pearls. Who let these people in? I did, I said, stepping forward. Because this is my house. Don't be delusional, Raymond snapped, closing the front door. We have the will. We have the prenup. The house belongs to the estate. As executor, I control the estate. The law is clear. The law is clear, Peyton agreed, opening the file. But you're reading the wrong page, Raymond. Peyton pulled out a document with a fresh, Blue County seal stamped on the top. This, Peyton held it up, is a quitclaim deed, recorded this morning at 8:01 a.m. It transfers the title of this property from Marcus Coleman to Marcus Coleman and Clara Ramsey as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Joint what? Julian asked, a chip halfway to his mouth. Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. Peyton enunciated every syllable, looking directly at Raymond. It means that the property is owned 100% by both parties simultaneously. And, crucially, upon the death of one owner, their interest does not go to their estate. It does not go to probate court. It does not pass through a will. Peyton smiled, a shark smelling blood. It transfers automatically, instantly, and irrevocably to the surviving owner. The moment Marcus's heart stopped beating yesterday, this house ceased to be part of his estate. It became the sole property of Clara Ramsey. Raymond's face turned the color of old ash. He staggered back, hitting the wall. That's impossible. The prenup covers assets distributed through divorce or death via the estate. Peyton cut him off. This house never hit the estate, Raymond. It bypassed your little legal wall entirely. It's called operation of law. Look it up. Elena let out a strangled gasp. But we promised Julian. The renovation. The contractors. Cancel them, I said, my voice cutting through her panic. Unless Julian wants to pay to renovate my house. Julian scrambled up from the recliner, brushing crumbs off his bare chest. He looked at his father, panic rising in his eyes. Dad, fix this. You said the house was mine. You said it was a lock. I can sue, Raymond sputtered, veins bulging in his neck. Undue influence. Marcus was sick. You coerced him. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Peyton pulled out a second document. Because of the no contest clause Marcus added to his trust, he left each of you $5,000, a parting gift. But if you file a single motion, a single lawsuit, or even breathe a threat of litigation, you lose the $5,000, you are disinherited completely, and you will be liable for Clara's legal fees. And trust me, Raymond, my fees are astronomical. Raymond looked at the sheriff. He looked at the documents. He looked at me. For the first time in his life, the man who thought he could buy God realized he couldn't even buy a sheriff's deputy. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his boots thudding heavily on the floor. He hooked his thumbs into his belt. Mr. Coleman, the sheriff said, his voice deep and authoritative. Major Ramsey has established legal ownership. That makes you, your wife, and your son guests. And since the owner has asked you to leave... Miller paused, looking at the potato chips crushed into the rug. I'm going to need to ask you to vacate the premises immediately, or I can arrest you for criminal trespassing. Your choice. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely delicious. It was the sound of a dynasty crumbling in real time. Raymond opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, but he saw no fear. He saw only the soldier he had mocked, standing in her fortress, holding the keys to the kingdom. "Get your things," Raymond whispered to Elena, his voice shaking with rage. "Not yet," I said. "There's one more thing." I pointed to the mess on the floor, the scattered chips, the moved furniture, the boxes Victoria had packed with my clothes. "You treated this house like a construction site," I said. "You threw my husband's medals in the trash. You disrespected his memory." I looked at Julian, who was trying to edge toward the door. "Nobody leaves," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "until every single piece of furniture is put back exactly where it was. And Julian, you're going to pick up every single crumb of those chips with your hands." "You can't be serious," Victoria scoffed. "I'm wearing Louboutins." "I don't care if you're wearing the crown jewels," I said. "Sheriff, is that a reasonable request before they leave?" Sheriff Miller grinned. "Seems like restoring the property to its original condition to me. Standard procedure." I pulled a chair from the dining room, the only one they hadn't moved yet, and sat down. I crossed my legs. I looked at the family who had tried to erase me. "Start lifting," I commanded. "I have all day." Julian looked at the scattered potato chips on the floor, then at me, then at his father, his face twisted into a sneer of pure, spoiled defiance. "I'm not cleaning that up," Julian scoffed, crossing his arms over his bare chest. "And I'm certainly not moving furniture. That's what we hire people for." "Dad, tell her to go to hell. Let's just go. We'll call the lawyers in the morning." Raymond straightened his jacket, trying to regain a shred of dignity. "Come on, Julian. We are leaving. We will not be humiliated by a squatter and a crooked country lawyer." They turned to the door. "Stop!" Charles Peaton's voice cracked through the room like a whip. He didn't move from his spot by the coffee table. He simply held up a sealed white envelope. "You can leave," Peaton said, his tone deadly calm. "But if you walk out that door without restoring this property, Sheriff Miller will arrest you for vandalism and theft. Those movers took items that legally belonged to Major Ramsey. Unless you move them back, that is grand larceny." Sheriff Miller nodded, his hand resting casually on his belt. "He's right, Mr. Coleman. It's a felony." "Fine!" Victoria shrieked, stomping her foot. "We'll call the movers back." "No," I said. "The movers are gone. You made the mess. You fix it." "Before the manual labor begins," Peaton interrupted, tapping the envelope against his palm, "there is one more piece of business. Marcus wrote this letter 3 days before he died. He made me promise to read it to you only if, and when, you try to cheat his wife." Peaton looked at Raymond with eyes full of judgment. He hoped I would never have to open it. He hoped his father would do the right thing. But Marcus knew you better than you knew yourself. The room went still. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Peaton broke the wax seal. He unfolded the yellow legal paper, the handwriting shaky and jagged, written by a dying hand fighting for every stroke. "To my family," Peaton began, reading Marcus's words. "If you are hearing this, it means you did exactly what I feared. It means you didn't grieve for me. It means you tried to erase Clara before my body was even cold." Elena looked away, studying a painting on the wall. Raymond stared straight ahead, his jaw working furiously. "Dad, you always preached about the Coleman blood. You told me that blood was the only currency that mattered, that we were special because of who our ancestors were. You were wrong. Blood is just biology. Honor is what makes a man. And in 35 years, I never saw you show half the honor that Clara shows every single day she puts on her boots." I felt a lump form in my throat. I bit my lip to keep from crying. "Elena," Peaton continued, turning toward the stepmother, "your sweetness is a weapon. You used politeness to cut people open. You treated Clara like a servant because you were terrified that her strength exposed your vanity. I saw you wipe your hands after touching her gifts. I saw it all. And I hated myself for not stopping it sooner." Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Julian and Victoria," the letter went on. "My brother and sister, I loved you. But I enabled you. I let you become parasites. You think the world owes you a living because of your last name. You are weak. And you are weak because you have never had to fight for anything. Clara fought for everything. She fought for her country. She fought for me. She fought for this house while you were buying cars and handbags with money you didn't earn. Peyton paused, looking at the scripture reference Marcus had scribbled at the bottom. There is a verse Clara loves. Proverbs 11:24. There is that scattereth, and yet increaseth, and there is that withholdeth more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. You tried to withhold everything from Clara. You tried to leave her with nothing. And because of that greed, you have lost everything. You have lost the house. You have lost the money. And you have lost the respect of the son who loved you. Peyton lowered the paper. Signed, Marcus Anthony Coleman. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It wasn't the silence of remorse. These people were incapable of that. It was the silence of people who had been stripped naked in the town square. That's a forgery, Raymond whispered, though his voice lacked any conviction. It's notarized, Peyton said, placing the letter on the table. Now, the furniture. I stood up and pointed to the foyer. The wingback chair belongs in the master bedroom, upstairs. You're joking, Julian said, his voice trembling. That thing weighs 100 pounds. Then you better lift with your legs, I said coldly. What followed was a scene of poetic justice so visceral I wished I could have recorded it for every person who has ever been bullied by the privileged. Victoria was the first to break. She tried to lift a box of books she had packed. Her red-soled Christian Louboutin wobbled on the hardwood. With a scream of frustration, she kicked them off. The fashionista who mocked my boots was now barefoot, her perfect pedicure gripping the floor as she hauled my books back to my shelf, cursing under her breath with words that would make a sailor blush. But the main event was the chair. It was an antique wingback, upholstered in heavy velvet, a piece Marcus's grandmother had left him. It was massive. Julian grabbed the bottom. He heaved, his face turning a blotchy tomato red. I can't. It's too heavy. Help him, Raymond, Sheriff Miller suggested from the doorway, his hand still resting on his belt. Unless you want to explain to a judge why you're damaging the homeowner's property. Raymond Coleman, the real estate tycoon who hadn't lifted anything heavier than a Scotch glass in 30 years, took off his suit jacket. He loosened his silk tie. He grabbed the top of the chair. On 3, Raymond grunted, sweat already beading on his forehead. They hoisted it. They staggered toward the curved staircase. I walked up the stairs ahead of them. I stood on the landing, looking down. Careful, I commanded, my voice echoing in the stairwell. Don't scratch the banister. I just polished it. I watched them struggle. I watched Julian's knees shake. I watched sweat soak through Raymond's dress shirt, turning the expensive Egyptian cotton translucent. I listened to their labored breathing, the grunts of exertion, the physical manifestation of the burden they had tried to dump on me. Step by step, heave by heave, they were carrying the weight of their greed. When they finally reached the top, they dropped the chair in the hallway with a heavy thud. Julian collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, clutching his chest. Raymond leaned against the wall, gray-faced, wiping sweat from his eyes with his sleeve. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They looked nothing like the titans who had sneered at me in the cemetery an hour ago. The master bedroom is to the left, I said, not offering them a drop of water. Put it in the corner facing the window. Marcus liked to sit there and watch the rain. They dragged it into the room. They positioned it. When they came back out, Victoria was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, holding her shoes, her hair a mess, her mascara running, ironically, just like she had mocked mine. We're done, Raymond wheezed, grabbing his jacket. We're leaving. One last thing, I called out from the top of the stairs. They looked up at me. I stood there, framed by the light of the chandelier, the mistress of my own fortress. Don't come back, I said. If I see any of you on this property again, I won't call the sheriff. I'll release the dogs. They didn't argue. They didn't threaten to sue. They shuffled out the door, heads bowed, defeated by a dead man's words and a soldier's will. I heard the engines start. I heard the tires retreat down the driveway. I walked down the stairs, silence reclaiming the house. I looked at the sheriff and Charles Peaton. "Good work, gentlemen," I said. "Pleasure was all mine," Peaton grinned, closing his briefcase. I looked at the spot where the potato chips had been. Julian had picked up every single crumb. The floor was clean. The house was mine. And somewhere, I knew Marcus was watching, finally at peace. Charleston is a city built on history, but it runs on gossip. In the humid, magnolia-scented air of the Low Country, secrets are the only currency more valuable than old money. And the story of what happened at the Coleman estate on East Bay Street traveled faster than a hurricane wind. 2 weeks after the sheriff escorted Raymond and his family off my property, the social fallout had settled over them like a thick layer of ash. They hadn't lost their fortune. Men like Raymond Coleman always have offshore accounts and diversified portfolios. But they had lost something far more precious in the South: their standing. I heard about it from Mrs. Abernathy, a neighbor who used to look through me as if I were invisible. She stopped me while I was checking the mail, eager to share the news. Apparently, when Raymond walked into the members-only lounge at the Carolina Yacht Club, the room went silent. No one offered to buy him a drink. No one asked about his golf handicap. The Whisper Network had done its job. He was no longer the grieving father. He was the man who tried to evict a war widow and got outsmarted by his own dead son. Elena fared even worse. The Junior League, the holy grail of Charleston's high society, quietly removed her name from the host committee for the upcoming spring gala. They claimed it was to give her time to mourn. But everyone knew the code. In this town, you can be mean, but you can't be caught being trashy. And trying to steal a house from a veteran is as trashy as it gets. I didn't gloat. I didn't post about it on Facebook. I just listened, nodded, and went back inside my house. The house was quiet now. The movers were gone. The furniture was back in place. The wingback chair sat in the master bedroom, facing the harbor, exactly where Marcus used to sit. On a Tuesday morning, a FedEx courier arrived with a thick envelope. The return address was Raymond's corporate office. I opened it on the kitchen counter. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000. Attached was a typed note on heavy cardstock, unsigned. "Consider this a settlement for any misunderstandings. We expect this concludes all interactions. Do not contact us again." It was hush money. It was a bribe to keep me from filing further complaints or perhaps suing them for emotional distress. $50,000. To Julian, that was a car. To Victoria, a failed business investment. To me, it was an insult. I looked at the check. I thought about the years I spent clipping coupons. I thought about the extra shifts I worked at the clinic. $50,000 could pay off the rest of my student loans. It could buy a new car to replace my beat-up Ford. But then I looked at the flag case on the mantel. I took the check out to the front porch. I sat in the rocking chair Marcus had bought for our first anniversary. I struck a match. The flame caught the edge of the stiff paper, curling it black. I watched the numbers, the zeros, the commas, the bank logo, turn into smoke. I dropped the burning paper into an old ceramic ashtray and watched it crumble into gray dust. I scooped the cold ashes into a plain white envelope. I didn't write a letter. I just slipped a small index card inside on which I had written 4 words. Honor is not for sale. I mailed it back an hour later. I never heard from the Colemans again. With the war over, I had to figure out what peace looked like. For a soldier, peace can be the hardest adjustment, but I had a mission. I went to the veterinary clinic where Marcus had worked, the place Victoria wanted to liquidate. I used the savings from my military pay, money I had been hoarding for a rainy day that had finally passed. And I bought out the remaining partners. I took down the old sign. In its place, I commissioned a new one, hand-painted in gold lettering. The Marcus Coleman Veteran Veterinary Center. I restructured the business model. We still treated the poodles and Persians of downtown Charleston, but I launched a new program. We offered free care for service dogs and heavily discounted rates for the pets of veterans. On opening day, the waiting room was full. I saw men with prosthetic legs sitting with their golden retrievers. I saw young women with PTSD scratching the ears of their support cats. I saw a community that had been overlooked, finding a place where they were treated with dignity. Marcus would have loved it. He would have loved that his name was no longer associated with real estate greed, but with healing. Life fell into a rhythm. I started running again. Every morning at 5 a.m., before the heat became unbearable, I ran along the Battery. I watched the sun rise over Fort Sumter, painting the water in shades of violet and gold. My lungs burned, my legs ached, and for that hour, I felt alive. I wasn't just a widow. I wasn't just a victim of family drama. I was Clara. Strong, capable, and free. One evening, about 6 months after the funeral, I sat on the porch as the sun went down. The cicadas were starting their evening song. I had a glass of sweet tea in my hand. For 8 years, I had made sweet tea for Elena. She always complained it was too sweet, or not sweet enough, or that the ice was the wrong shape. I had drunk it with a knot in my stomach, waiting for the next criticism. I took a sip. The condensation was cool against my fingers. The tea was cold, amber-colored, and sugary. It tasted like summer. It tasted like ownership. For the first time, there was no bitter aftertaste of resentment. It was just tea. And it was perfect. I finished the glass and went inside. I walked up the curved staircase, the one Raymond and Julian had struggled to climb, and went into the master bedroom. I stood before the full-length mirror. I wasn't wearing my black morning dress. I wasn't wearing scrubs. I had put on my dress blues. The fabric was crisp, the creases sharp. I opened the jewelry box on the dresser. Inside, resting on velvet, were the medals I had rescued from the trash. The Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, and my own commendations. I pinned them to my chest. They clinked softly, a familiar, comforting sound. I looked at my reflection. I saw the lines around my eyes. Grief had left its mark, yes. But the eyes themselves were clear. The shadows were gone. I looked over my shoulder at the empty wing-back chair by the window. I didn't feel lonely. I felt a presence, warm and reassuring, like a hand squeezing mine under a dinner table. "We did it, Marcus," I whispered to the empty room. "The perimeter is secure. The home is safe." I touched the bronze star, feeling the cold metal warm under my fingertips. "Mission accomplished," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "Rest easy, soldier. I've got the watch from here." I turned off the light, leaving the room in darkness, save for the moonlight spilling across the floorboards we had saved. I walked downstairs to lock the front door, my door, with a key that finally, perfectly, turned in the lock. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my battle with the Colemans, it is this. Your value is never determined by the people who refuse to see it. For years, I thought if I just worked harder, smiled more, or stayed quieter, they would finally respect me. I was wrong. Respect isn't something you negotiate for. It is something you command by knowing your own worth. You cannot change a toxic family, but you can change the locks. Don't let a bloodline or a bank account define you. Stand tall in your own truth, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop trying to please people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family members who didn't have your best interests at heart? How did you handle it? Please share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and we can support each other. If Marcus's final letter gave you chills, or if you cheered when we made them carry that heavy chair, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more stories of justice and resilience to light. Until next time, remember to hold the line. This is Major Ramsey, signing off.